Good afternoon, everybody. So the idea was that I talk about government. I'll get right into it. I have a slideshow that's very not special. So the idea was that I talk about government again. 2019 was a year of continued government intervention. However, the various levels of government seem to be working in silos in their efforts to solve the housing crisis, compounding an environment of significant uncertainty. On various specific government measures to create affordability, we have the City of Vancouver Empty Homes Tax. We have a multi-jurisdictional sustained effort towards policies requiring essentially vacancy-controlled units. We have a provincial speculation tax. We have a provincial additional school tax. We have a luxury property transfer tax. We have a foreign buyers tax. We have potentially a federal foreign buyers tax, and we have the federal mortgage stress test. I swear there was a supply-side measure that was being discussed. There was something. And so anecdotally speaking, what is the outcome of this intervention? When the mansion in West Vancouver that was listed for $12 million sold for $6 million, there was a collective fist pump by many market enthusiasts. Many said, now I'm going to be able to afford that little bungalow east of Main Street that I had my eye on. So what happened with that little bungalow east of Main Street? How do I do that? There we go. So the little bungalow east of Main Street in the City of Vancouver that in 2017 sold for $1.2 million, sold for $1.1 million at the end of 2019, and you got a new garden. That's about a 10% drop. Big improvement. It's about a 10% drop in price for a single-family home in East Vancouver. So what? Is $1.1 million affordable? Taxing our way to affordability, though it was politically popular, isn't really moving the dial on pricing. On 2019 municipal policy, I constantly think of irony when I think of municipal policy. Google says, situational irony involves a striking reversal of what is expected or intended. Example, a person sidesteps a pothole to avoid injury, and in doing so, steps into another pothole and injures themselves. So, our elected officials across the Lower Mainland are pushing their staff as hard as possible to develop well-intentioned policy that will generate new affordable housing across the continuum. They are allocating massive bandwidth to this, and the irony is, as I understand it, their own municipal government pension funds are finding it challenging to make sense of opportunities that would include much of the aforementioned policy in its current form. That's ironic. Look, at the end of the day, industry recognizes how hard folks are working at local governments. I was in a meeting with the general manager of planning at the City of Vancouver not long ago. It was around 6 or 6:30 p.m. midweek. I looked around, and I kid you not, every single desk had a staff member working feverishly. So the issue is not that city officials aren't working their butts off. It's that there's this crisis, and we're all trying to figure out how to fix it in silos. All municipalities are developing policy at a pace that I've never witnessed in my career. And it's become so complex that all the policies are competing with one another and nobody's prioritizing anything. Is the tree more important than housing? Is heritage more important? What about shadowing on streets? I've said this before. Do we have a shadowing crisis or a housing crisis? This is an image of how I feel currently. The hydrant is government, the water is policy, and that's me hanging on for dear life. I'm going to leave that up there for a little bit. So 2019 was yet another year of underbuilding desperately needed purpose-built rental. Does anybody know why? Let me tell you. What a business to be in. What other business do you have where the expectation by many is your revenue should be frozen, but your costs increase exponentially without any relation to the revenue freeze? And that's just your problem. Can you imagine if the government said we're going to cap the amount you can increase the price of a pint of beer on an annual basis, and then they increase the taxes on all the inputs to brew that pint of beer by triple the amount they cap the revenue by? Now, it's not a great comparison, and some will say, Beau, you can't compare beer to housing. Beer's a nice to have, and housing's a basic need. However, what I'm doing here is trying to compare a private sector industry to another private sector industry. There's the rub. The country has relied on the private sector to deliver housing. The private sector. That means there has to be at least a little profit and certainty, right? And now the private sector is being forced to keep old buildings standing that are at the end of their useful life, all the while operating in an environment of capped revenues and increasing taxes and costs with no ceiling whatsoever. Like, what the hell? Flipping the page here. With this being said, we've arrived at a very divisive time where ideals are driving policy, with pragmatism seemingly being erased from our lexicon. But the thing is, capital has a very low tolerance for uncertainty and a lack of fairness. If we want investment in rental, and I mean like Seattle-style investment, you must first acknowledge the operating environment you're asking folks to risk their capital in. Which leads me to zoning and land rights. Our system has evolved to the extent that our zoning and land rights are the foundation under which our entire business stands. When you go to obtain a land loan, the loan is generally based on value. And value is based on zoning and what you can rightfully do with the land. With this said, I implore local governments to stop systematically eroding these rights. If we don't have zoning and land rights, we have nothing. We have uncertain land values and a compromised financing environment. We will vigorously defend these land rights. I know some cities are somewhat upset at how aggressively we've come out against downzonings and the like. You must understand, you will only continue to see this reaction. And frankly, I'm getting so tired of this bullshit. For those folks out there with deeply rooted ideals who believe home builders are the enemy, we have to move on from this narrative because it's a massive hindrance to collaboration and generating solutions. To the tenancy activists and landlords out there, unless we're going to socialize 100% of our housing, landlords and tenants have a symbiotic relationship. Landlords can't be in business without tenants, and tenants can't have a home if not for landlords. We need to work together. So to all levels of government and stakeholders, our industry is at the table to find common ground and come up with solutions in 2020, and solutions that work. Please just pick up the phone. Here's my prediction for 2020. If governments at all levels continue to develop policies in isolation and without truly engaging and listening to the private sector, who they claim to call partners, we will not see the desired outcome in terms of achieving any level of affordability. If the federal government doesn't start spending some of its billions in BC, we won't see outcomes. If the provincial government doesn't back off on some of their demand-side measures and start genuinely working on supply-side solutions, which was promised, by the way, we will continue to underbuild. If the municipal governments keep developing policies that are rooted in good intention, but inadvertently are undermining our ability to deliver new housing, it will be the status quo. And regarding good intentions, everyone, the road to bad policy outcomes was paved with good intentions. Thank you.